Hello and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to the big news. The topic for today's discussion, UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage. Let us try and understand what is this topic all about. First up, let's look into the context. UNESCO has added the cooking of borscht, which happens to be a soup usually made with beetroot and potatoes in Ukraine, to its list of endangered cultural heritage. UNESCO said that the war in Ukraine had threatened the cooking of the borscht. So what is this borscht? This happens to be a soup. This is usually red in color because it is made from beetroot, and at the same time there are green and white variables that are also present as well. While Ukraine considers that borscht to be its own national dish, but there are other countries as well, let's say for example in Russia and also in other ex-Soviet countries like Poland, where they also prepare this dish as well. And as a result, its origins are contentious because on one side Ukraine claims this to be its own national dish, on the other side you have multiple other countries which also consume this dish as well. This is where the origins of this particular dish is also in contention. This was added back in the year 2020, that is, Ukraine made a proposal. This was ultimately to be guaranteed by the year 2023, but what happened? Because Russia invaded Ukraine, because there was an emergency, and now they have decided that they have to give this dish to Ukraine as an intangible cultural heritage. It should have ideally been there by the year 2023, but because there is an emergency situation, because Russia invaded Ukraine, you have this particular dish which is accorded as intangible cultural heritage to the country of Ukraine. Now the question is, what is this cultural heritage? When we speak about cultural heritage, historically or traditionally, if you speak about cultural heritage, what would come to your mind? You would have the monuments, you would have multiple places, you would have the forestry as well. This were accorded what is called as the cultural heritage site. But of late, what you also have is multiple other ways into which this cultural heritage is taken into picture. Let's say for example, there is a family. This particular family is teaching its future generation a particular type of knowledge, or it is making sure from the ancestors and to the descendants there is oral traditions that is passed on, or it can be social practices as well, or it can also be rituals as well, or it can be the festive events as well. All these festive events are also culture which is restricted to a specific ancestor or to a particular family, and from that particular family it is also passed on to the future generation. So in order to make sure that this is also safeguarded, what we have is the intangible cultural heritage list. So when we speak about intangible, it basically means there are some customs, there are some value systems which is transferred from one generation to another, and as a result what we have is this being safeguarded by that particular country. And what happens, this country usually nominates, and it is UNESCO which awards this as the intangible cultural heritage, with the aim of ensuring better protection of important intangible cultural heritage across the country. And in order to create awareness of their significance, UNESCO established the intangible cultural heritage. So historically it was more to do with monuments and other things, but now what we have is these traditions which are passed on from one generation to another. The rituals, the oral traditions, performing arts have all been added into this intangible cultural heritage. This list also encompasses living expressions and traditions. Intangible cultural heritage means the skills, knowledge, expressions, representations, practices, as well as artifacts, objects, instruments, and cultural spaces associated with them that various groups, communities, and in certain cases, individuals recognize as part of their cultural heritage. Now, the question is, what is the criteria? What is it based on? There are four important parameters: traditional, contemporary, living at the same time, inclusive, representative, community based. What do we mean by traditional, contemporary, and living at the same time? Generally, when we speak about these customs, what happens? It is assumed that it always has to be historical in nature, that it always has to be someone who's passing on from one generation to another. But there can also be the present context as well. There can also be certain customs which are practiced from now to the future generation as well. Even that will fall under this intangible cultural heritage. heritage. So intangible cultural heritage does not only represent inherited traditions from the past, but also the contemporary rural and urban practices in which diverse cultural groups take part in its participation. It has to be inclusive as well. What do we mean by inclusive? It means that we may share expressions of intangible cultural heritage that are similar to those practiced by others, whether they are from neighboring village, from a city on the opposite side of the world, or have been adapted by people who have been migrated and settled in a different region. They all are intangible cultural heritage. They have been passed on from one generation to another, have evolved in response to their environments, and they contribute to give us a sense of identity and continuity, providing a link from our past through the present and into the future. So they basically include a similar context, similar programs, similar ideas, similar cultural aspects, which can also be present in one area, in one region. It can also similarly be in another area as well. So this contributes to the idea of social cohesion, encouraging the very idea of identity and responsibility, where individuals at large feel part of the society. So the very same culture might be present in one area, the same culture might be present in another area, but based on the environment in another area, there can be changes as well. So if these changes are included, if these changes become part of the larger society, everyone starts engaging and they feel pride about their culture. Then we have representative, which is intangible cultural heritage is not merely valued as a cultural good on a comparative basis for its exclusivity or its exceptional value. It thrives on its basis in communities and depend on whose knowledge of traditions, skills and customs are passed on to the rest of the community from generation to generation or to other communities. So this basically highlights how it is being passed on from one generation to another. Finally, we have the intangible cultural heritage right, which can only be heritage when it is recognized as such by the communities, groups or individuals that create, maintain and transmit it. Without their recognition, nobody else can decide for them that a given expression or practice is their heritage. So as we discussed, it is about the community coming together. The larger section of the people decide on it. So if larger section of the people decide that it is our custom, it is our tradition, it is our value system, it is our performing art, it is our history, that is how it has to be recognized. So people come together, they recognize, yes, this is our custom. So when they recognize this as their custom, that is when it will be carried forward in the near future as well. So basically, when we speak about this intangible cultural heritage, how is it recognized by the UNESCO? What we have to look at is the nominations. So every year, various governments, that is different countries, make their nominations so that this is included in that representative list. So what they do is they make nominations. Once they make the nominations, what we will have is the Intergovernmental Committee of the UNESCO. So the Intergovernmental Committee will look into various aspects and ultimately gives this honor for that particular heritage. So we have oral traditions and expressions, including language as a vehicle of this heritage, performing arts, social practices, rituals and festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship as well. All of this, if it is meeting a certain criteria as established by UNESCO, in that case, what you will have is this identity of that country, this heritage will be included in the representative list of the UNESCO. So it aims at drawing attention to the importance of safeguarding cultural heritage and is a repository of cultural diversity and a creative expression. So once it has been identified, it goes to the representative list and ultimately there will be much more awareness as well as safeguarding. But do note, in India, what we have is a Sangeet Natak Academy, which is in New Delhi, which is appointed as the nodal agency for the implementation of the UNESCO Convention on Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage. Which are the intangible cultural heritage from India? What we have is the Buddhist chanting, Kalbela, Chow dance, Kudiyattam, Kumbhamela, Mudiyattam, Navras, Ramlila, Raman, Sankirta, traditional brass and copper craft of utensil making, Vedic chanting, as well as yoga. These are some from the India which have been represented on the representative list of the UNESCO. So what will be its impact? So the minute it is on the representative list, what is the significance or the advantage? What impact it will have on the society? So the minute it is recognized, what will happen? It will tangibly contribute to the visibility of this intangible cultural heritage. It will lead to recognition of this intangible cultural heritage, and this can be orally transmitted for generations to generation, so that this is ultimately reaching those people who would want to learn as well. Its encryption could also provide and encourage dialogues with other communities worldwide. Let's say there is one community, this community likes this particular art form or the rituals, so this community can interact with another community as well. They can also give an awareness about this particular ritual. Such listing on the representative list will ensure much better visibility. It will also create awareness as well, and also showcase cultural diversity of that country. It makes it obligatory on the various governments to safeguard the intangible cultural heritage. So when the governments are making the nomination, and it is the UNESCO which is accepting it, and once it is accepted by UNESCO, what you will also have is the home government will make it sure that they provide the finances to safeguard this cultural practice, and at the same time they will also safeguard it as well. On its part, the UNESCO would facilitate international cooperation, provide financial assistance, and extend support for studies, provision of experts, training, and creation of the infrastructure. So all of this will lead to continuity of that particular practice, so that this is not forgotten by the future generations. However, do note, when it comes to this cultural practices, we also have to make sure that special efforts must be made to give wide representation to the cultural heritage. Artists and their community should be placed at the center of this endeavor. There should be more promotion, marketing, and they should also be provided platform so that they can express their opinion about their ritual practice art form on these forums, so that ultimately more people know about this intangible cultural heritage. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this issue. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.